the whole team. This evening is dedicated to the refuah shlema of all those superheroes in green uniform who have been injured over the past year, as well as to the release today of our brothers and sisters who have endured unimaginable days in hell, and the bodies of those still captive, among them Daniel Peretz, Zichrono Livracha, the son of Rabbi Peretz. In addition, this evening is in memory of my maternal grandmother, Paula Raka, the matriarch of our extended Raka clan. My grandmother was sent as an 11-year-old with her 9-year-old sister, Susie Bradfield, from Germany to London on the Kindertransport. She was one of the fortunate ones. Her parents and siblings managed to escape Germany and join them. She met my grandfather, a survivor of the camps who had lost his entire family in Israel during a visit after he had fought in the War of Independence. He moved with her back to London, they married, and they created a loving home, raising 3 daughters, each of them named after his 3 sisters who were killed in the camps. My grandfather passed away at the young age of 67. My grandmother lived many more years, passing away at the age of 91. Today, the majority of her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren live in Israel. Despite the many adversities she had to overcome, she was the most positive, joyful, and resilient person I knew. Her unwavering faith was an inspiration to everyone. And so it was no surprise that she passed away peacefully Erev Hoshana Raba. Sukkot represented her life philosophy. Joy is not found in the certainty and permanence of material structures and needs. Instead, under the canopy of faith, embracing the vulnerability of life's journey, surrounded by family, friends, and sharing the precious moments that sanctify time and space and give life meaning and its richness. Her generation exemplified the idea that only facing moments of fragmentation and adversity can one truly appreciate with depth and authenticity what pure and genuine joy really are. In this past year, we have watched our youth face death after death, loss after loss, and incomprehensible suffering, yet simultaneously demonstrate inconceivable strength, resolve, and courage to keep going. I think so much about my grandmother, her generation, and her great-grandchildren's generation, 3 generations apart, yet forged from the same essential Jewish DNA that chooses life over death, resilience over adversity, and good over evil. May her memory, together with the memories of all those who came before us, continue to be a blessing for us all, because we need that blessing now more than ever. I want to begin by talking about what we're going to do this evening in the short time that's left. A year ago, as we all know, we faced a cataclysmic moment, the biggest since the Holocaust. Micha Gutman referred to that day as regards from history. For the first time since the creation of the State of Israel, 76 years ago, we were reminded of what it feels like to be bereft of a sovereign state and the apparatus that sustains it, a government, an army, an infrastructure. We were taken back to the dark days before the state, when Jews had no means of defending themselves. In many ways, Zionism and the modern state of Israel were built on this premise of power and self-defense so that never again could be a practical reality rather than an empty promise. On October the 7th, that empty promise was revealed once again. And we all know that it wasn't just our enemies that infiltrated what we thought was an impossible border, but the sheer barbarity that was perpetrated on that day shocked us to our core. And it's not over. We are still in the midst of raging battles on every border. Our soldiers are fighting like lions, our hostages remain in dungeons of Gaza, and hundreds of thousands are still displaced. Tens of thousands of shattered families are heroically trying to rebuild their fractured lives and cope with their trauma. There are many things we could have discussed tonight. We could talk about the events of October the 7th, and I need not tell you, as I'm sure many of you already know, Rabbi Peretz's story on that day, its heroism and tragedy, courage and heartbreak, and its aftermath that he's still living out, deserves an hour and a half of its own. We could speak about the polarization in Israel, whether it was a factor in the events leading up to October the 7th, and we could delve into the many precedents in Jewish history of pogroms and genocide. But tonight, we've chosen to focus on something else. We've titled tonight's conversation, How to Heal Our Fractured Nation. The title's inspired by one of our teachers, Rabbi Sacks's book, How to Heal a Fractured World. Why? Because our belief is that throughout our long and tumultuous history of suffering and tragedy, we, the Jewish people, have somehow managed to triumph against all the odds. And there is no doubt that this is a turning point in Jewish history. Time and again, I hear people say it's as if we're living in biblical times, for the good and the bad. There's something about this moment with all its unimaginable suffering and tragedy that feels momentous. But as in every pivotal event in the past, it's up to us to determine what the end will look like. Tonight, we will take you on a journey. We will begin by discussing some biblical examples of the kind of resilience and response to tragedy that we believe should frame our discussion, and the core being the Tanakh. We will then hear from Rabbi Peretz about his own journey over the last year, a microcosm in many ways of the national one, marked by tragedy, trauma, and broken triumph. In the third part, we will engage in a slight philosophical discussion, I know it's late, won't be too philosophical, on the questions of healing and redeeming evil. And in the last part, we will explore practical ways we can move forward and begin to fix, both in a literal and sociological sense, our fractured people. We hope that you will come with us on this journey through our conversation, and that you, all of you, every single one of us, will be inspired to be part of that change. I want to be clear. None of us alone can change the whole reality. It's something that we can only do together. And as Rabbi Talfon reminds us, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, v'lo alecha, v'lo ata ben chorin lebatel mimena. It's not up to you to complete the work, but you cannot desist from taking part in it. Today we are all being called on. HaSharon, God, is turning and saying to us, Ayeka. And we need to respond to Hineni as we mirror the response of so many of our heroes and soldiers and citizens of October the 7th. I'm going to now move this. Hold on. So, thank you so much for our parents for being here this evening.
If it's working. A pleasure.
I want to begin by very briefly, since I have the mic at the moment, I'll start, talking about one of my personal favorite biblical readings, where I see one of the first, in fact, we're going to be reading it this week, Parashat Bereshit, where I see the notion of resilience beginning the story of humanity, and that is the story of Cain and Hevel. Cain and Hevel, two brothers, the first brothers, and they are, siblings, but one is called Cain, and Chava even says, Paniti Yeshat Hashem, I've brought him here with God, and the other one is Hevel. We're not even told the reason he's called Hevel. Hevel, nothingness. Remember, we just read Hevel Havalim, terrible translation of vanity. Vanity is really not a good translation, I'm sure you'll agree. But this kind of nothingness, this kind of fleeting breath. And Cain has everything. Hevel is left told to go and wander. Cain stays there, he gets the family land, everything going his way. He's born with a silver spoon in his mouth, things are great. Until one day he decides he's going to thank God and tick the box and thank God for giving him everything. So he goes and he brings a sacrifice, his brother comes along and follows suit, as younger brothers do. And he also brings a sacrifice. And guess what? What happens? Hevel's sacrifice is accepted and Cain's is not, which is super surprising. And Chazal come along and they try and explain, and they go all out their way to try and understand why it would be, because the text doesn't tell us. And I want to suggest that in many ways, if you look through Tanakh, very rare that God comes and explains why bad things happen. In fact, almost nowhere. Instead, God turns around to Cain after, remember, he's born with a silver spoon. This is the first time he's ever faced some form of adversity in his life. Something has not gone his way. And like a spoiled child, what does he do? He falls on his face, he gets angry, he gets upset. And God turns around to him and says, why are you getting upset? Well, we all know why he's getting upset. He doesn't understand why his sacrifices are being taken. And God turns around and says what I think is one of the most important verses, I would say, even dare to say, in the whole of Tanakh. He says, Halo im teitiv se'et, ve'im lo teitiv lefetach hata rovetz, ve'elecha tshukato, va'ata timshol bo. It's a very enigmatic verse, so much so, again, we have all of the rabbis coming trying to explain what it means. But I'm going to dare my own explanation with humility. And I think what way we could possibly translate it is, Halo im teitiv se'et. If, teitiv is a very strange word, if you make good of this, you will be lifted, or you will lift others, or your sacrifice will be lifted, as some suggest. Ve'im lo teitiv, if you don't make good of this, lefetach hata rovet, sin will always crash at your door, ve'elecha tshukato, and you will always be drawn to it. And the only person, as Viktor Frankl says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. The stimulus is the fact that his sacrifice hasn't been accepted and he doesn't understand why. What is going to be your response to a situation that you don't understand, that you have no control over, that you've been thrown into the depth of hevel, of nothingness, of not knowing, of your mortality, of brokenness, of adversity? What is your response going to be? And God turns to him and he doesn't explain himself. He doesn't say, well, I took your brother's sacrifice and not yours because X, Y, Z. Life doesn't always give us answers. And therefore, we have to make a choice. Either we are drawn into anger and drawn into sin, or we make the choice to make good. And that we can have a whole discussion what that means, to make good of the situation. And the only one who can do that, va'atatim sholbo, you have control. What I want to suggest in this reading is the biggest question to Cain here, the person who's the quintessential possessor, is can you live without possessing the pure knowledge, the understanding of why things happen? Can you live without getting angry because of that? How do you respond? And we know that in the end, Cain's response, he doesn't hear what God says. His response is to kill heaven. Both in a literal way, but also in a metaphorical sense. To kill the nothingness within, that space, that area of not knowing, of our mortality, of the fact that we're dust of the earth, the fact that really there's some things that we will never necessarily know, but can we still make good? I'd like to invite Rabbi Peretz to share with us perhaps a biblical text that speaks to him about this notion of adversity and resilience.
Thank you. Is it Rabbanit, Doctor?
You just call me Tanya.
You can call yourself Tanya. So to Rabbanit, Dr. Tanya White. Dr. Tanya White. It's a sort to share the platform with you. Rabbanit Oshra here. She's running between the two. I just want to second what you said about Rabbanit Oshra's incredible energy. I'm very familiar with the Kaplan family. She's a Kaplan, and I know a number of her brothers. Rav Dov, who was a brother in Kesari, my parents were for a number of years, Rafi, and many of the others, incredible family, and the Korean family are both incredible families. And it's incredible to see the tremendous work that Matan is doing, and it's a sort to be here this evening. I think I'm going to contextualize what I want to say based on what you just said. Because I think one of the most important words in all of Tanakh, I think the pasuk you says a very, very powerful pasuk, is the word hevel. And in English, if you look at all English translations, 38 times it says in the book of Kohelet, hevel, havel, havelima, kol hevel, amakra, kol hevel. It would behoove us to know what this word means. Futile, futility is vain, Is that what Shlomo Melech is saying? Is life, does he even have a havamina, a thought that life is vain or life is futile? What does the word hevel mean? And I read an article many years ago in a publication in English called Azur. It used to come out many years ago. And in this was an article by somebody called Professor Ethan Dorshav. And he said an amazing, amazing thing in this article. He said most times that the word hevel is used both in Tanakh and by Chazal, it means hevel piv. It means something, as you said, fleeting. A breath is a hevel. Adam la hevel dama. A person is like a fleeting breath, it says in Tehillim. Chazal talk about the word hevel, meaning vapor, in the Mishnayot. What is hevel? It's the most, as you said, nothingness, but the most fleeting physical existence. It's nothing more than a breath. And Shlomo Melech, in this very, very confusing book that Chazal wanted to tuck away and put in Shemas in Gnizah, so many contradictions. But says Ethan Dorshav an incredible thing. He says, if you look at the word hevel, hevel means fleetingness. Life is fleeting. The moment we realize that every single thing we have, the Kinyanim, can get taken away in a moment. When Shlomo HaMelech realizes that every single thing under the sun can get taken away. No one was wiser than him. Rav Soloveitchik's biggest fear always was to lose his mind, and that's what he lost. Often our biggest fear becomes our reality. And what's wisdom? Musif. Musif machov. You can lose it in 1 second. He's got all the wealth in the world. Lose it in a second. Nobody had more than Shlomo HaMelech of Kohelet. Nobody amassed more than in wisdom, spiritually, and physical possessions. But all of a sudden, Shlomo realizes, for what? It can all get taken away in a second. The person has not yet been born who can tell us what's going to happen in 1 second, in any place, in any person's life. Now, even the Nevi'im had Nevuah is talui on our behavior. Even Moshe Rabbeinu's Nevuah, nothing is mukhlat, because we have free choice. And certainly today when we don't have prophecy, the reality that life is unexpected and fleeting. I remember once when we had a tragedy in our community in South Africa, and we had many, unfortunately. I remember thinking to myself, I just had this thought that we actually have nothing. This word have doesn't exist in Hebrew. What does it mean, I have? What does it mean, I have? You don't have that in Hebrew. In Hebrew, you have yesh. Yesh, there is something, li, and it's related to me. We have nothing. What we are is hevel piv. We're a speck with enormous importance, but know not what will be in the next instant, in anyone's life, in any way. Life is so unexpected, and we saw that unfortunately in the horrific events of October 7. How the smartest army in the world was so dumbfounded. How the people could look with every single digital eye and see nothing. Makat Sanveri. How everything can change in an instant, for good and for bad. The fleetingness and the unexpectedness of life, which is related, begets crisis. And I noticed, says Ethan Dorshav, in the first half of the book, often when the word hevel appears, it comes the word uruach. It's bad. Oh my goodness, it's bad. And you know what we say? We say Matan Tokef in that haunting breath. Adam Mashul Kecheres Anishbar, person like a broken shard. And then 7 descriptions of the fleetingness of life. Ketzitz novel, Ketzer over, Chalom Ya'ufer. 7 different expressions. What is the brokenness of life? It's the realization that everything you have can get taken away in 1 second. God forbid. Your family, your children, your health, your possessions, everything. It's frightening. But says Dorshav, as you look at the book of Hevel, or Utrach, in the second part you won't find the word Utrach, because then there's the miracle of acceptance. Somebody said, philosophers said, I'm not saying I agree 100% with this, but there's a lot of truth in it. Suffering is hardship, which is yet to be fully accepted. I don't like platitudes. I've seen so much suffering this year from my wife, our family, and hostage families, just unimaginable. I can't look at the hostage families who children, family might be alive. I can't look them in the eye. I know that what we went through, thinking that maybe our son was alive. And I'm very grateful that it was a maybe, because that maybe gave me strength, because I knew maybe he's not alive. And for me, I took a lot of strength. Whenever I closed my eyes at night, I said, there's a good chance that Daniel is dead. And if so, Baruch Hashem, he's not suffering 1 minute by these murderers. But I might never ever see him again. But maybe he's alive. So maybe I will see him again. But if he's alive, he is maybe being, tortured. But maybe he's not. Maybe he's dead. So the fact that we had a doubt that Daniel was alive, for me, was enormous strength. Maybe nothing is happening. Oh, yes, he might, God forbid, and then we've got the rest of our life to more, but I don't have to worry about that now, because maybe he's alive. For those who know their children are alive, in our tent we've got Matan. I can't look at Anat and Chava, I know the pain that they're going through, and it's suffering that is unimaginable. And therefore, the fleetingness and unexpectedness of life is frightening. It's bad, it's a root ruach. But then Shlomo Melech changes in the second part, and his tone changes. You won't find once in the last 4 or 5 chapters the word root ruach. He accepts it. When you accept things in life that you can't change, you can embrace them. And therefore, the frightening tone of Unatana Tokef, of how deep, as you said, vulnerability, becomes what we celebrate. For crystallized Sukkot, it's a celebration of vulnerability. We sit exposed to the senses, knowing, not to the senses, to the elements, knowing that maybe our sukkah can stand up to Ruach Mitzvah, but it can't stand up to anything else. We get blown down in a second. The sun, the rain, it's the flimsiest. It's in fact, as Chazal say in the Kabbalists in the Zohar, it's itself. It's a shadow, it's a nothingness, as you said, but it's a tsela, it's a shadow which its essence is not what you have. It's what it is. It's the shadow of faith. When a person lives in Hashem's world and is connected to Hashem and connected to their own values, no one can ever take that away. And if our life is based on the things that can never, ever be taken away, who we are as a person, the values we live by, then there's nothing to fear. We live in Hashem's world. And the incredible thing about Sukkot is that we celebrate vulnerability. And he ends off and he says, he says the same thing, but he said, but soft davar, it's fine. Because we do have control, and that control is to exactly as you said. In Tetiv say it, at the end of the day, we have control to choose the type of person we want to be. To fear Hashem, to love Hashem, and to serve Hashem. And I really feel, for me, the Hevel that you so beautifully said is maybe the key. Cain lived much, much longer than Hevel. And his whole life was built on Kinyan. But what a cursed life he had. Hevel, whose life came and went, he lived, I think, 362 years, but in those days, but if that was right, maybe I'm wrong. He was young, he died young, 362. But look at his life. Look how meaningful. He was the one favored by God. He was the one whose life was so meaningful. And therefore, ultimately, how long we live and how we meet our end is often not our choice. And therefore, there's nothing to worry about. Don't have to waste time on things we don't have control over. But what do we have control over, as you said, is our sphere of influence. And if our sphere of influence is based on our values, on the person, on who we are and who we want to be, no one can ever take that away from us. And therefore, if we accept that we live in God's world and not ours, and He has all the chips and we don't, then don't worry, be happy. And if things don't turn out the way that, one thing I've learned this year, and I wrote in this book, and I've said a few times, that when we live in Hashem's world, everything's okay, even if it's not. And even if we're broken and you showed me this beautiful book that I hadn't heard of called It's Not Okay, but no, what's it called?
It's okay not to be
It's,
okay.
it's okay not to be okay. I hadn't heard of that book. I made up my own thing. It's called, I don't know what I said. I think I said it's similar. I said it's not, I said, even though it's so not okay, and we'll never be okay in our lives. Our lives will never, ever be dreading the Simchat Torah. I'm actually not dreading it personally because I know that I'm going to celebrate and I know I'm going to cry my eyes out. And it's okay. We did that at our son's wedding. And most days of my life, I'm celebrating and crying out about something. And since October 7th, and I've realized, don't ever push off a simcha. Don't ever dread a simcha. We'll talk about that. I'm a rabbi, you've got to stop me. Otherwise, I mean, you had a nice long introduction. So I'm still behind in town. I didn't want to say it, but since you stopped me.
You obviously don't know me well enough. So firstly, I think it's very important to add to that the punishment of Cain is he becomes Hevel. He has to be a Navnet. He has to basically leave his controlled situation and spend the rest, and he says, this is too great a burden for me to bear. I can't do this. Because he, exactly as you said, he cannot accept things that are out of his control. And I think that it's so important, this notion of accepting things that we can't control, and yet taking agency where we can. And that's what I think today we really are going to move to speaking about, which is really this idea of how we take agency of our national situation, how we can change perhaps the end story. And we're going to get there in a second. The other thing that I think is very important is we know Sukkot is the Chag of Simcha. We're told in the Torah that it's Zman Simchatenu. It's really the only Chag that's defined as being happy, which is ironic that we read Kohelet, which is really the first existentialist, angst-filled, depressed book in the whole world, because ultimately what we're saying there is happiness, exactly as beautifully you expressed. Happiness comes in the moment where we recognize the fleetingness of our existence, and yet we accept that. And then we try in our sphere of influence where we can influence to create moments, kind of these windows of joy and happiness, but joy in a deep way, not this as Kohelet Shlomo Melech might say, eat, drink and be merry. By the way, that phrase, eat, drink and be merry, for tomorrow you will die, it comes from Kohelet. People don't always know that, but it's there. That's its source. And really, the answer is not eat, drink and be merry. The answer is accepting things that I can't and then finding meaning and purpose and moving forward. So I think it's also beautiful that October the 7th came on the heels of, or just before Parashat Bereshit. And we know that the country was totally polarized and unfortunately still is, but maybe not exactly in the same way. And as we come full circle back to Sefer Bereshit, I think it's very important to be reminded of the story of Adam and Chava, who ultimately really have the quintessential kind of adversity. They've lived in Gan Eden, this perfect reality, and all of a sudden God says to them, you're exiting that, you're going to work the ground, nothing's going to work for you. You're going to have to go through pregnancy and child rearing, which we all know that gap between what you expect and what actually is huge in child rearing. And you're going to have to go into this non-ideal world. And the most amazing thing happens. Instead of Adam going back into his bed and putting the pillow over his head, he turns around, he does something fascinating. The response to God's kind of exile out of Gan Eden is he looks at his partner and he dignifies her by giving her a name. And what's the name? Chava, happens to be my second name. Em Kol Chai, the mother of all living beings. What does he do? He essentially, number one, dignifies the other, recognizes that there's something outside of the self, and number three, he chooses life. I think it's a beautiful way for us to go into the new year. Those three things, because in many ways, that's exactly what we have seen over the last year. We have seen some rectifications of dignifying the other. We have seen many times, again and again and again, in our people, choosing life. and recognizing that there's something bigger than just the eye, which we thought were, that TikTok generation, we were all wrong. They are the quintessential generation that see beyond the eye and understand there's something bigger. So I think it's a very important message for us all. I want to ask Rabbi Peretz now to share with us. I know many of you, I'm sure, have already heard his story, but I think it's important for those that haven't, and even those that have. He's going to do a very short version to share with us his own story. And more important than anything, I've asked him to share with us also the way that he personally, the coping mechanisms in some senses that he has found, the strength that he has found in himself and his family over the last year.
Thank you. If I may, I'm just going to just say one word about the acceptance. This comes from a book which is a very, very popular book. It's called The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck, a psychiatrist who basically, based on him seeing thousands of patients, distilled his wisdom into this book. And I heard about this book and I read it about 15 years ago, and I have to be honest, I opened it, I read the first 2 pages and I closed it. I said, I don't need to read anymore. That's just changed my life. I did read more later on, but it was such a powerful teaching for me, and I just want to share it with you. Scott Peck said like this: life is difficult. Life is damn difficult. I'm not sure if he said damn, I'm just saying that it. Life is very difficult. But he said the one thing that I've found in my experience of my thousands of patients is the moment you accept that life is difficult, it's no longer so difficult. He said we spend our life fighting against our impression that life is supposed to be easy, as if God owes us something. Somebody asked me in a South African, I was in a talk in South Africa, they said, the fact that this has happened to me after ever I came into the South African Jewish community, is it something that's shaken my faith? I said, I think if it would have shaken my faith, then I'd be a very shallow person. 1.5 million children died in the shrine. That didn't shake my faith. God shook me, and all of a sudden I've got a crisis. But because I'm in personal pain, and what about Jewish history? What you say regards from history? That you can have a crisis from. But I've got a bit of personal pain. I think it's a bit of arrogance. I mean, who am I? The Klausenberg Rebbe lost 11 family members. Rabbi Elie Bloch lost 11 family members. Families in near Hoshana have been totally wiped out. And God forbid one has, one's own personal suffering, and all of a sudden you've got a Shiloh. Who are we? God doesn't owe us anything. Also, this word deserve. You don't deserve. What is deserve? I don't know what that word means. I don't think it exists in Hebrew. There is tzedek, of course, and we aren't always privy to Hashem's tzedek. So I just wanted to say that for me, reading that I think when we accept that life is challenging and we just live that life just is, one of the things I worked very hard in my own life is I'm a very driven person, and I'm a very results-orientated person. Sometimes I'm a better human doing than a human being. And because doing, and that's why, by the way, I managed better in the first 163 days, I want to say, because I could always do something. As long as I could do something to bring Danielle back, I managed to challenge my thoughts into action. And then I was in my comfort zone. The moment I was told that Danielle is deceased and there's nothing I can do about it, for me was the biggest crisis, because I now had to be with that pain. And yes, I can work to bring him back for burial, but it's not the same. And life just is. Hashem is Hayahu Veviyeh. He was, is, and all we have is this one moment we have right now. And if we can accept that life just is, I think as Dale Carnegie said, that 50% of the things we worry about never happen. So first, it's a waste of time to worry. And second, for those 50% of things that may happen, like I said, as you said, so do something about it, develop a plan. I realized in the first 163 days, those who don't know our story, I'll come back to that thought. Just quickly doing my 1 minute, what happened to us. Those who don't know, it's really very quick. I imagine a lot of people here do know. But by the end of the first day of October 7th, Simchat Torah, our son Jonathan was injured. He was shot in the thigh in Nachal Oz base. He was at home with us with his fiancée. He left at 8 o'clock in the morning when his Magad, he's a Mempei, then he was a company commander in San Khanim, in the base of new recruits. He left and he fought in 6 different places and he got shot at 2:45 through the thigh. By the grace of God, many people fought on that day next to him were killed and many were badly injured. By the grace of God, Jonathan was shot in the thigh and it went in and out of his thigh and missed his main artery. His brother, unfortunately, wasn't so lucky. Around 120 meters from where Jonathan was injured, Daniel was shot, injured, killed, and taken hostage at 9:01 and 46 seconds. He was shot. We know this from the black box in the tank. Daniel was positioned at Nachal Oz. He's also an officer, tank commander. He got into his tank at 7:15. He fought for 2 hours and 16 minutes against the first and second waves of the Nukhba. And then he made a very, very difficult decision at 9:45. We heard that the recordings to leave the safety of his tank position. He was the last tank left. In fact, on Friday, we have a meeting with members of Kibbutz Nachal Oz. Have invited the parents and the families of the soldiers who were killed at Nachal Oz for a meeting, because the fact that every one of the 130 children of Nachal Oz are safe and relatively few people were killed at Nachal Oz, 40, relatively few compared to Haraza next door and Reim down the road and Be'eri down the road. They wanted to thank us and meet us, and we're meeting them in Kibbutz Nachal Oz all the way on Friday. So Daniel realized that he's the last line of defense. Him and his tank crew, the other tank had been hit. So they left their tank position and they fought another 15, 16 minutes where they killed many of those 50 or 60 second wave on motorbikes with RPGs, but eventually they were overcome. And a terrorist got onto the tank and he was shot in the back of the neck. That we know from back of the head from the footage, which they declared his death 163 days later. So we knew Daniel was missing for 2 weeks. Then he was probably taken captive. Then he was confirmed taken captive. And then he was confirmed injured. And again, I say in brackets, we were lucky that we got as painful for me. One of the hardest days was the knowledge that Daniel had been shot and injured, because they found blood in around the tank and on a uniform which was his. We knew that after about a month. For me, it was one of the hardest days, because I always felt if Daniel survived day one in one piece, I felt there's a good chance he'll be okay. Once I knew that he was at best moderately injured, but probably worse, I was not particularly hopeful, and it was very, very difficult. But in the end, thank God, because of that, we actually have something to bury. Most people don't have anything to bury. So we actually, even though we don't have his body, we do have a grave, which is immeasurably, for me, less hard than not having a grave. So there's blessing within the curse. So I just want to say, coming back to the 163 days, and just end with that, I was just saying, if I felt in these 163 days that I could just put my head in the right place and try and do whatever I could in the first 163 days, that if I wouldn't put my head in that place, there would be nothing I could do for Daniel. It would destroy me and I wouldn't be able to help him. And I felt grateful that I was able to, for 163 days, to go to my default position of action. But it's been much harder for me since day 163 because of the, zehu, and that's when the morning for me began, even though we have to close the circle. Anyway, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you. I wanted you to speak, I know you mentioned it earlier, about the wedding of Jonathan, which I think is really important for us all to hear coming up to Simchat Torah. I know many people have asked, what do we do on Simchat Torah? It's meant to be this beautiful, happy day, dancing with the Torah, joyous, and we're all in pain, everyone in their own way for different reasons. And how can we be joyous and at the same time be in deep pain? How can we kind of navigate that dichotomy between pain and joy? And I know that in the book, One Day in October, which in the English version is Daniel's story. The new second version of the Hebrew is going to be in as well. And after this, also speaking with the editor of the book.
Is Aurea here?
No, I think she's probably not.
Good timing. She comes back, let me know. I want to introduce you to Aurea. She's talking Hebrew next, but she interviewed me for Daniel. Talk a bit about it.
Just show people the book so they can see it. It's 40 stories, 40 heroic stories, 40 heroes, 40 stories. And in that book, you beautifully express how difficult and yet at the same time joyous that occasion was. And I think it's really important for us to all hear from you how you navigated that almost impossible situation.
I'll share briefly because I have expressed it a lot. I just want to say where I expressed it the most is in this booklet. You might have received this. I have brought lots of copies of it. We've got some left in English, so there'll be enough for everybody. We'll leave them outside to take one. This for me, I felt for me that coming up to the Chagim was going to be the hardest time for us. The last time our two sons davened, that were both at home together, was on Rosh Hoshana, and they davened on each side of me for those 2 days. Yom Kippur, they were both in the army. First day Sukkot was the last time we saw Daniel. He was with us, and Jonathan came at the end, and of course in Simchat Torah. So it's a very, very difficult time for all of us. And would you think that our son's life was decreed on Rosh Hoshana, Yom Kippur, Hoshana Raba, according to Kabbalah, and then Simchat Torah happened. What happened before we could even daven for Daniel? He had already been killed and taken hostage before we knew. So for me, trying to process this period, I felt, we're all in national trauma. Maybe all the ideas that I've tried to sort of express, I thought I'll try and put them in the booklet. Being a rabbi, it's always good. I always felt that the Yamim Noraim was the most impactful time. Therefore, I thought to try and connect it to the days of the Yamim Noraim, of Rosh Hashanah, of Tshuva, of Yom Kippur, of Sukkot, of Simcha, and Simchat Torah. But in this, I shared, and again, there will be others, but I just want to share one point, which for me, we were cursed and blessed. We were cursed in terms of what happened to Daniel, and we were blessed in terms of what happened to Jonathan. The pasuk for us of Hashem Natan, Hashem Lakach is exactly what happened to us. Hashem gave us one son back, and he took another son. Many other people, he gave them both of their sons fighting back. Many others, he took both of their sons and took families. So for me, the first interview that I did was the day after the wedding. We decided to go ahead with the wedding. It was my wife Shelley's brave decision. I wasn't sure what to do. She felt the couple should get married if they want to, even though Jonathan was injured and Danielle was missing at the time. And once they made sure that we were okay with it, and I was being guided by Shelley, she had a tremendous strength to do it. I don't know how, because I really didn't know if I was going to be able to do both. But an amazing thing happened to me. I said this in the interview the day after, and I think for me, this is maybe for me the most profound teaching, learning. And I want to share very briefly. I was very, very scared that if I brought Daniel with me under the chuppah, I wouldn't be able to do it. How am I going to, the thought of what he's going through and where he is? For me, it was clear that he had been taken captive. Daniel, he wasn't going to be hiding anywhere. It was clear that he had been taken captive. For me, at that time, even though he was missing, and I was very, very, we were all full of angst and everything. So my decision was not to bring him under the chuppah with me. I said, I'm not going to think about him for 5 hours. I'm going to try to blot him out of my mind. And that's what I tried to do. But circumstances wouldn't allow me to do it. Shelley said just before we went to the chuppah, Doron, we have to go into Daniel's room. I said, no, we don't. Shall I have to feel his suit? He was the stylish one in the family. And I said, no, please, I didn't want it. I went in with her. It's still very hard for me to go into his room. She wanted to feel his suit and cry. And every part of me didn't want to do that. But I went in. And as we got out, I said, Shell, let's just focus on Jonathan. That's what we've got. We've got a lot of time to worry about Daniel. And that is my coping mechanism. And I share that under the chuppah. The rabbi arrives under the chuppah, and then he all of a sudden says, Salim Gazi, our rabbi had Binyamin Avanish of our Knesset has been probably 9 of the 12 months in Miluim. He's still in Miluim. He's a rabbi of Chativa. And he starts like this. He came from the front lines and he said, how can we start this wedding without talking about the one who's not here? And looking, I can't, please. Why? I can't believe he's doing it. And he started talking about Daniel, and we just all started crying, and then started davening for Daniel. And then I look back and I realize, of course, he did the right thing. How wrong it would have been what we can in South Africa is a word called chaff. You can like chop. Can you? I don't know what it is in English. I don't really care. But you can make. I didn't mean to dig. I mean, I did.
Right.
But it's,
You know, we were first.
yeah. It means to like pretend. Yeah, it means to pretend. Yeah. It means to like hilu. How could we do that? But I was scared that if I did that, I wouldn't have a simcha. Because how can you have both? And I learned an incredible thing. We cried bitterly under the chuppah. And as I was wiping my tears to move off the davening, I gave the tissues to my wife, and I saw that she was crying less than me. Wow. She can, want a little baby, so not little baby, big baby. It cleared my tears, and I realized the incredible thing that we were able to do that. And then we had big family pictures, which were incredibly painful with them very quickly. But I saw an unbelievable thing when I got to the end of the wedding and I slept that night. I said, wow, we were able to feel the absence of Daniel's presence so deeply and acknowledge it and cry it about it and then move to Simcha. I said, well, how resilient the human spirit is, how resilient the Jewish people are. We had Yonatan Razel came and he sang V'Hishamda. And I feel for me, the resilience of the Jewish people is firstly the resilience of the human spirit, because I think ultimately our aim is to guide humanity of what human beings are capable of. We've seen in Hamas what human beings are capable of, in an animalistic way, and the Jewish people to remind what we really are capable of with our nefesh and neshama. And I think for me, the ability to acknowledge pain and honor it and feel it doesn't have to mean darkness. And I know that our life will forever be tinged daily with pain. And I know the happiest occasions in our life are going to be tinged with the most painful yearning. And it's all right. I said, it's okay. It's so not okay, but it's okay. And I think for me, resilience is the ability to not to avoid and escape, to give a place to the pain of life, to honor Daniel's presence through his absence. But at the same time, know that it doesn't have to color all of life. Isn't there, a day is made of night and dark, and everyone's life is made of different colors. There's black, there's challenge, there's pain, but there's so much else. And to have it part of one's life and honor it, but not let it color everything, I think is what resilience is about. And for me, I'll just say my last comment in terms of this. We go to, if you want, on the macro, but just finish the micro. For me, the coping mechanism is that's the schutz of being a Jew. Is that no people arguably has suffered as much as we have, yet we have never been defined by that. We've always been imtitesi. We've always, after every painful thing, we came out of Mitzrayim and received the Torah. We had the Churban Beit HaMikdash. We built Yavne v'Chachamim, the Torah Shebal Peh. And we had the Shoah, and somehow we rebuilt the state of Israel and the Torah world. And we had. And I have no doubt out of this is going to come, with all the pain on a private and personal level, is going to come the best things for the Jewish people. Appreciation of what we have in the state. And I have no doubt that it's going to be unbelievable. I don't know how much pain and suffering there'll be in the process. And we hope and pray that'll be as little as possible. But it really does feel that there's a new era, and Rav Kook says every war brings about something new. The First World War, from a Jewish point of view, brought about the Balfour Declaration. The Second World War, with all of its pain, brought about the state of Israel. And this war will bring about something amazing for the Jewish people, Bezrat Hashem. And as a people, we're always able to be resilient and bounce back. And I think that's the schut of being part of the Jewish people. It's a painful schut. What does Tevye say? Thank you for choosing us. God, can't you choose somebody else for a change, I mean, thank you, but shkoyach, But, by the way, that's the best Ashkenazi word. You say shkoyach in every situation. Yeah, that's it. No.
Thank you. It's very difficult to speak after all of those stories, and just to witness your incredible strength, which I think, as you said, is a microcosm of the macro story that's been going on over the last year. And I think in many ways, even if you said after every war there's been something, I think what we've witnessed is the sheer strength, courage, adversity, agency, resilience of this generation of soldiers and everyone. And to remind ourselves of our own strength and our own resilience and our ability and our agency. And instead of looking at ourselves in the negative light that we did before October the 7th and looking at the other, someone who isn't like me, to recognize we're actually all part of one thing. And if we think of Yaakov, the minute we received the name Yisrael, that Yaakov has this struggle with this ish, whoever this ish is, probably a reflection of his own inner self. And at the end, the ish names him Yisrael, and he says, Ki sarita im anashim ve'im elokim v'tuchal. Yes, it's a struggle, and you're going to struggle with God, and you're going to struggle with man, and you're going to struggle, but you will be enabled, you will be able, you will take agency. And I think this is so much of what you're saying. There's an element of acceptance, there's an element of moving forward, and the joy and the pain is exactly what Sukkot is about. So we don't have much more time, but I want to very briefly just talk about the idea of
That's Oria Mavorach. You like this Oria? Oria? Thanks. Oria is one of the very, very special authors of the book Yom Echad of October. Had the sort of her interviewing me for the book in English. Oria? Pardon the square.
he promotes it, don't worry.
And I just wanted to say that Oria interviewed me, and it's the first time I've met her in person. Almost met you, so I've seen her in person. We've had many Zoom meetings, but and we're very grateful that our son's story was included in the book through South African donors who contributed to the translation that's dedicated to our son. And so thank you, Sharon.
Okay.
We got 5 minutes.
Yeah, 5 more minutes. There are people here that want to go there, right? I presume. Okay, so it's okay if we go on for 5 more minutes? Okay.
Anyone who'd like to leave, please go. Just don't ever come back to any of that. I'm really just joking. Seriously, if you need that, it's a joke.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for coming, and we're here all the time, you know that.
Let's go for 5 more minutes, but on a serious note, if anyone doesn't need to go, we're very much with hearing for you.
So we're just going to get to the third and fourth part, which we're going to do together. So I've spoken about, not just me, many people have spoken about this idea of October the 7th being almost like a near-death experience, that for the first time, probably in our history, we really thought and understood what it would be like not to have a state of Israel. And very often when people have near-death experiences, or unfortunately, God forbid, lo aleinu, go through a terrible illness or a trauma or an accident or whatever it happens to be, very often it kind of triggers a reflection on themselves, on their lives, on their priorities, on where they want to be, what they want to do. And in many ways, I think that this kind of near-death experience that we had as a nation should trigger self-reflection, reflection on ourselves as a nation. I was going to get a little bit into existential philosophy, but maybe we'll skip it. But the father of existential philosophy, Martin Heidegger, he speaks about this idea of any authentic living can only be done when you understand, when you've accepted death. When you've accepted that in some ways life is always moving towards death. And in some senses, exactly, I think it really goes back to what you were speaking beautifully about, which is this idea of acceptance, the acceptance of heaven, the acceptance of the fleetingness, the acceptance that perhaps we can't control everything. And once we've accepted that, say the existentialist philosophers who began with Heidegger, but really I'm talking here more about those in the post-war Paris era, people like Sartre and Camus and many others, Simone de Beauvoir, who's my favorite. Many of them speak about the most incredible ability of freedom, of choice, once you've accepted your own mortality. And I wonder whether, I want to try and perhaps think very much about this idea. I wonder whether as a nation, we had got to a certain status quo. We believed that we were infallible. We believed that our borders were infallible. And in many senses, what happens on October 7th is a near-death experience. It's a wake-up moment. It's a wake-up call. It's that moment of coming face to face with our mortality. And then the question is, what do we do? How do we use our freedom? How do we make a choice for life, for authentic life? And what I want to discuss and to ask you is, facing the Hevel, how do we then choose what Adam does? To choose to dignify the other, to choose life. How do we do that as a nation? Rabbi Sachs speaks in his book, To Heal a Fractured World. He bases his philosophy, often when you talk about fixing the world and tikkun olam, we think about universal ideas, we think about the big things. But Rabbi Sachs in that book actually turns everything on its head, and he speaks about the small deeds. It's very much influenced by Chabad. The small deeds, the things that we do, the random person on the street, the shakuf, the how do you say in English, the person who we don't see, transparent person on the street that does those incredible acts that have this butterfly effect. And the question is how all of us, just people going about our day-to-day business, how can we transform our people? How can October 7th be that near-death experience that actually is the trigger, is the beginning of fixing our people? Not on a massive scale, not all of us can be these incredible people, but on that individual, day by day, act by act, deed by deed. And I wonder, I know that you've been involved in many different things. I wonder if you can share with us some of your ideas on that.
I know we have to finish, so I'll just share maybe briefly an idea and then some initiatives. For me, I believe something I believed before October 7th. I wrote part of it in a book, which I'll speak about in a minute. I believe it so much more afterwards. And that is, it actually doesn't matter who's right in relationships. We all know that. Because a relationship is, always say if you have an argument with your spouse, a good argument is when at the end of it, it's not important who's right, but you feel closer to each other. Not as a good result is, you feel further from each other and each one knows that they're right. And in a relationship, it actually doesn't matter who's right. It matters if you can weather a disagreement together. That's what Rosh Hashanah calls Brit Oral. Our challenge, in my opinion, is this questionableness of the covenant of fate. What more do we have to go through? For God's sake, we still have 101 hostages. Every one of us have family members on the front lines. And look at the threats around us. What more needs to happen for us to make the decision of this near-death experience than to get close to the abyss of Sinat Chinam, which Chazal have reminded us of. We still somehow think it's somebody else and it's not us. In my opinion, it's not the random acts of kindness. It's the random acts of acceptance. It's actually not random. It's the intentional acts of acceptance that the parts of the Jewish people that we vehemently disagree with are absolutely necessary for the future of the Jewish people. I was always a bit troubled by, well, what are we doing on Tisha B'Av? Let's learn about Lashon Hara. And Lashon Hara is very important every day. The question is, how do you speak about the people who are not part of your community? Can you see the good in them? Are they necessary for the future of Jewish destiny, or are they the enemy? And every ideology, says Rav Kook, is deeply lacking. Deeply lacking. And every ideology, says Rav Kook, needs the other one to complement it. But the media and ideologues focus the whole time on the deep divisions, and there are deep divisions. And every once in a while, we have this terrible reality where external circumstances come along and say, it actually doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter, Kaplan, it doesn't matter. When you're facing an enemy order, I mean, it matters. I always said that the mashal is, does it matter whose hands are on the steering wheel of the ship and the ship's about to sink? Does it matter whose hands on the steering wheel of the ship if there's cracks? Just, put a safe pair of hands on the steering wheel and focus your energies on ensuring that the ship is able to weather. It doesn't even matter what direction it's going into, because even if it's going in the right direction, it can still hit an iceberg. And if it's going in the right direction, it may not reach the shore because it's not going to get there. We live in such tempestuous times, and we have to convert, in my opinion, the understanding of that we're in this together, despite our deep, deep disagreements. Rav Sachs often speaks about that our relationship is not one of transactional, it's a brit, it's not a scam. Sorry?
Not contract.
It's not a contract, it's a covenant. And a covenant means that we're in this together. We're in this together. And I don't know what more needs to happen for us to understand that there have to be certain things above disagreements, and there have to be certain things that no matter what the disagreements are, in this together. I think that's our biggest challenge. I do want to say that this is a plug for a book. The truth is, I wanted to plug this book. And I phoned Cora and I said, make sure to bring the book. They said they've run out of copies. I said, I don't know why I'm caring about Cora more than Cora is. But I said, if this was me, I would make sure that you've got copies of the book, but they don't. Okay, so I brought my own book. So I just want to say that you can get it in Stamesi. Why make people share? You can get it in Stamesi, in Somesrim, and all of your reliable bookstores, I imagine. But I do want to say that this is a book that I wrote 1.5 years ago. Came out in Hebrew 6 months ago, and it actually just been translated into Spanish. It's coming out next month in Spanish by somebody who read it in English and said he wants to translate it into Spanish. I said, Gesundheit. So, well, I don't know what I said in Spanish. Ciao, bello. I don't think it's Italian. But the bottom line is, I love to end. I just want to say, I do have some copies of it here, and I think you can still get in some of the stores. It came out a while ago, but I do have some copies here, which we're selling for 60 shekels, and they're also outside. But I want to say, this book, it's called The Jewish State from Opposition to Opportunity. The first part of it is to try to work out why anti-Semitism became anti-Zionism. It's based on Torah sources, Chiddush of the Gra. That's the first 6 chapters of the book, going into history and looking at the Tanakh through the eyes of the Gra, of the types of anti-Semitism. The second part for me is the most important part, and that's a vision for unity in Israel. Why the world needs it. I've tried the person who's most impacted in my life is Rav Kook in terms of writings. And I tried to take Rav Kook's ideas of Jewish unity and put them into a platform for Jewish unity. And that's what I've tried to do, an ideological platform. I haven't gone down deep into the resolutions of practicality because that's where the devil's in the detail. But what I have tried to do is give a platform which has to begin with accepting different ideologies and explains what those ideologies are and how the universal and the national and the religious, etc., and an understanding. And that, in my opinion, in this book that I do want to say, there's one chapter called The Blame Game. And in this chapter, I try to say that everyone, I'll tell you why we don't need a national inquiry, because all of us know the answer already. Everyone on the left knows that Bibi is to blame, he's always to blame. Everyone on the right knows who's to blame. Everybody knows exactly who's to blame. Now, we do need a national inquiry. But at the moment, there's a machlok. Is it going to be is it going to be a Israeli? What's that? A civilian inquiry? We can't even. Why? Because there's no trust left in society. Because everything's in the world, by the way. Look how the world is going. Look at the candidates in the democratic world. It's either extreme right to extreme left. That's what's going on. What's missing? The ability to say people is in it together. One of America's major challenges, all democracies, and everybody's got the right to do everything, but don't have the responsibility to do anything, as Raba Sachs speaks about. We've lost our national narrative because everyone's got their own narrative. But the national narrative, when we can't talk the same language of what it is as a people, always people who push to the extremes, they've always got a monolithic narrative. And the narrative, says Rav Kook, has to include, we are at the same time universal, or at the same time religious, Torah, yes, and at the same time we're a people and a nation. And all those are true, and how we manage them is the challenge. And I really do believe that the blame game is not how it's going to happen. It's going to happen only where, as you said, when each individual takes an ideology, takes personal responsibility for what we can do differently, because we're all in this together, is when genuine change takes place. I still find even people at previous, we are a little bit to blame, but they're much more to blame. But maybe, maybe we're all in this together, maybe it actually doesn't matter, I don't know how it's going to be resolved with the Haredim, but they aren't going anywhere. So yes, I've lost my son and many of our children over here, but what's it going to help to shout, kick and scream and alienate? And I don't want to get to the sugya because I've got my own views on how it can be resolved, but I know for sure it's not going to happen by law. It's only going to cause machlokas, and it's not going to happen by dialogue, because we can talk till the cows come home, whatever that expression, wherever that comes from. Maybe it's an English thing. The cows come home. But I saw in Hendon there's still cows running around. I don't know. Nice. But yeah, I just do want to say that all of these things are going to have to be resolved. It can't be that our children and so many others are bearing the burden, and people's businesses and families are falling apart because only a certain part of it can't be. But at the same time, it also can't be that we're going to cause endless machloket. So what are we going to do? We have to know we're in this together, and we have to find a way to work it out together. And it's very complicated. It's incredibly, and the issues of the Kaplanistim, and the issues of the Haredim, and the issues of the certain things, the Datulami world, all these things are very, very challenging. And how are we going to work it out? We're in this together. We're in the boat together. If we dig a hole in any of the compartments, as Chazal say, the boat's going to sink, so it actually doesn't matter. We're in it together, and we better work it out. And I want to say that only the beginning of the change is when we understand that we are in this together. And we can't force anybody like we would want to be forced. What's the golden rule? Don't do unto others. Would any of us want to have a rule forcing us to do something? Then why are we doing it to others? Should we just talk until the cows come home? No. There has to be a different way, and there are solutions. And if there's a will, there's a way. And my opinion, without getting involved too much into politics, is when the center, from left to right, gets together and says, let's keep the people at the extreme where they should be, at the extremes. They're part of the Jewish people, and they should be part of the boat, but boy, oh boy, they should not be ripping the steering wheel in each side, because if it's from the right or the left, you just break the steering wheel, people putting it every side. The strong, unified center needs to get together and say, we together are going to steer the ship, and there's room for all of you. But boy, oh boy, you're not going to be pulling the steering wheel right or left. We're going to do it together, and I think it is doable. And just before I end, and I am ending with this, is I just want to say the topic of that Oriya chose to call our son's story. It's called If Not Me Then Who? And that's because, and I promise I'm ending with this clean header, no I am. So shkoyach, there we go. That's another good one. You say to somebody, are you going to do it? They say, a clean header. I said, are you going to do it? Bezrat Hashem. God's not my problem, you're my problem. Are you going to do it? And the answer you want to say is absolutely. That's the answer. Because even if a person says they are, who knows what's going to happen? There's extenuating circumstances, and we all rely on it. But when they start it, then I know they're not going to do it already. Yes, I am absolutely. So I just want to say, I don't even know what I was saying. Thank you very much. I want to say that is that Daniel's diary returned from Nachalos. We didn't know that he kept a diary. It's a diary that my wife always says the biggest gift she's received from Daniel are his friends. He's got so many friends, unbelievable friends. He really fulfilled Rabbi Yoshua, and Rabbi Yoshua says, Rabbi Yochanan is like, but I don't know what's the most important quality. He says Rabbi Yoshua, one of the 5 opinions, Chaver told Daniel was the most unbelievable, unconditional friend, and he's got tens and tens of friends who believe that he was their best friend, from his brother to tens and tens of others. He was an unbelievable friend. But for me, the biggest gift that I got from Daniel is his diary, because in his diary I learned a lot about him, and that I didn't know, and I feel bad that I didn't see him the way he saw himself. He never spoke to us about it. But when he became an officer, he started keeping a diary, and in this he wrote on the front page of the diary the 5 things that he thinks about every night before he goes to sleep, and we don't only have time for one, and I generally talk about that one. He said that since he was in Poland in the Shoah, he understood the price the Jewish people paid for not having a state. how we were, what happened. And he said now that he's a soldier officer, it's his sort to do for the Jewish people. And then he wrote these words, Imrani as me, if not me, then who? And my daughter spoke about it at the Levaya, and it's sort of become a little bit of a charge. And I think, if not me, then who? And that's it. I think exactly what you said. It all begins with us, what you began with. We've all got to take our own personal responsibility, each one of us in our sphere of influence. And even though I just said that is the last thing, luckily I said, luckily I got out of it, because there is one thing I want to do, and then definitely is the last thing. Where is this block? Maybe it fell down. Yeah, that's exactly it. I just want to share this with you. This is my wife's project, the Beta Media project. I just want to quickly share it with you. And I have brought a few of them outside. And by the way, in the book, you can, on the inside cover of the book is how you can get them online through Chick and whatever it is, Chick, what it was called, but you can order them. And I just want to say one thing about this, is that the short story, and I'll be very, very brief, is that many people have commented that the most amazing thing in Gaza, in every single room and child's room in Gaza, is a picture of Al-Aqsa. They've even called their war Tufan Al-Aqsa, the Al-Aqsa. They know exactly what they're fighting for. We're not clear. It's part of our problem. We don't listen to what our enemies are saying. It's all about Jerusalem, according to Hamas. It's on every emblem, it's on every dustbin. I have at home a rocket cover of our son's an RPG. We found by where the tank was, an RPG cover in Arabic. It's got 2 pictures of Al-Aqsa on it, on the RPG cover. It's on the dustbins, it's on they know exactly what it's about. We're not so clear. And my wife felt very strongly that if they're so clear with such hatred for what should be much more important to us through love and yearning and desire, then maybe part of the tikkun is having what we call bite before bite. And therefore we've done a picture of the Beit Midrash with a thing of the Yerushalmi about the Gula, and it says bite before bite. They're having the Beit Midrash in every home. Yilu Nishmat Sarah and Daniel Peretz, the Zichram Shelan Oflim, the Hashavatam Shel Chatufim, to put next to the candles. So there are a few available. I just brought whatever I had in the car. That's for 25 shekels. And that's the lowest price you can get them for. No, I'm saying this, if you go online and you haven't picked it up, that's the lowest price, but there's only a few of them. But I do want to say we've actually sold 10,000 around the world, and all around the world. And it's really just to be able to have a sense of, you know, a tikkun, something small as you said, to channel the negative energy in a positive way. We should all be able to, you know, do what each one of us can do for the sake of a better future.
I know you're the host. I'm going to keep this very brief. I'm going to end with quoting something that we just went down south, and just recently in the last week or two, they created a memorial, a monument where the Sderot police station was. And on there, it's 18 pillars for Chai, and on all of there's different various psukim on different pillars and various quotes. And on one of the quotes, Song of Hanan ben Arif, Song Moledet, homeland. And the thing they quote is Lo'olam tieli moledet, gam al saftahom, gam b'toch gehenom at Gan Eden. I will always have a homeland, even at the edge of the abyss, even in hell. You will always be paradise. To me, that symbolized exactly what we've been speaking about today. The kind of oscillation between joy and despair and pain and grief, and knowing that it's always our homeland. And even when it looks like hell, we have that choice to choose life and to make it into the most incredible place. And it really is up to us, with the help of HaSharon and with the help of the history, that we look back and we understand that it has happened and it can happen again, that we can really turn things around from tragedy to triumph. And I thank you, Rabbi Peretz, because I think you really, in some senses, everything that you've shared with us today, very personally, and generally, your Torah and who you are and what you've been through, is an example for all of us to look at and to say, it is possible. It is possible to choose life. It is possible to live between the joy and the pain. It is possible to, despite terrible suffering and tragedy, to turn around and say, I can take agency and I can make a difference. So I leave today, in some senses, with a mandate for all of us to choose life, to take agency, to move forward and to ask and answer the question, Ayeka, where are you? Hineni, I'm here. We're all going to do something to change the reality on the ground. Thank you all so much for coming.
Everyone needs a positive life.
I remember the one Friday night. I got up and I gave this party Friday night, and I followed up to Shabbos. I said, I want to be the change. And now look at that, I'm living here because of it.
Amen. So